Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lois Sonstegard, and I'm here today with Denise Hummel. And we have had the most wonderful experience. We met each other when Marshall Goldsmith was filming his documentary and wanted to do a demonstration of one of his trainings. And we were both present. And as we shared and talked, we were so energized by what each of us has been doing. And so we have started conversations and just wanted to continue that and share some of that with you today. I'm Lois Sonstegard. I'm an executive coach and consultant. I do a lot of work with companies that work cross-culturally and globally. I grew up in Japan, and so I understand some of the nuances of working cross-culturally and where are some of our stumbling blocks. So Denise, I'll let you introduce yourself.
You know, it's funny, Lois, with all the discussions we've had, I forgot that we had that common bond in terms of cross-cultural knowledge, because I was an attorney for many, many years, and I ultimately ended up building a cross-cultural model of communications optimization and scaled that to 65 countries and sold it to Ernst & Young. Became a direct admit partner there, and then left EY to found Lead Inclusively, which, as you know, is focused on the connection between inclusion and business performance. So we call ourselves a technology-enabled consulting firm.
It's impressive, very impressive. One of the things that we've talked about, Denise, is as you talk about what does it really mean to be inclusive, we've really explored and shared some of what does that mean. And so one of the things that resonates for me in our conversation is that there's so many pressures that are upon organizations right now. And so we have this sense of what's happening outside the organization. And that's what people see and view. The shareholders view that. But what's happening internally within the organization is not congruent with that. So for me, one of the best analogies that I use when I think about that is we've created systems that are like trees. They have beautiful bark on the outside, but when you look inside, what you see is it's all eaten up. It's rotten in the inside because the termites have eaten it up. Mm-hmm. And so part of what we haven't done is to tend to that inside that really makes that building strong. And we know if we don't do that, that tree eventually topples over, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And that doesn't work. It doesn't
Absolutely.
work for anybody.
Yeah. I actually like the way you talk about it, Lois, when you say that, when you talk about the fact that demonstrating positive interest in others creates that connection where people can thrive. I know that you share my belief that when you show that interest in people, when you include them and help them to have a sense of belonging, that we're actually giving them hope. And I love the way you express that so much, that I just wanted you to share that with the public a little bit.
Sure. My greatest gift in life was my mother's stories. My mother was a prisoner of war in the Second World War. And one of the things that she talked about was how at night they would know who would not be alive in the morning. And you go, how could that be? How could you know who isn't going to be alive in the morning, right? And she would say, it's because when you give up, our human soul dies. And when it dies, our body dies. And so I've used that story so many times in the work that I've done, because once we give up hope, we have nothing left. And part of what our organizations are begging for, it's what our millennials are begging for, is where's their hope? Where's my future? Does anybody care about that?
Right.
And if we don't, then we begin to shut down. So one of the things I was sharing with you, Denise, is I've done some work with Gary Varsho, who is a scout for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and he was also a professional baseball player for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And one of the things that he talks about is when he is scouting and he's looking at teams, sometimes people will go from the AAA level to the professional, and there'll be a ping pong back and forth. And he'll say, why? What happened? And sometimes what makes all the difference, what moves the person from the AAA into the professional league, is somebody said something that was different, that resonated, that brought out that positiveness that the person could relate to. And suddenly they opened up like a flower. Mm-hmm. And so what we say, what we do, how we create our structure, how we create our culture, we either shut people down or we open them up. And if we want to innovate, we want to produce results, we have to open them up, or we're not going to have what it is that we're wanting to achieve.
I couldn't agree more. And it's funny. Well, I mean, it's poignant, actually, the information that you learned from your mother with regard to that whole concept of knowing who was going to be dead in the morning. And even though that doesn't typically happen in an organization, what does kind of happen is that people are dying inside from that sense of lack of belonging, or feeling that a deep lack of connectivity. And we've actually identified what we call the 3 R's of inclusion in terms of the leadership behaviors that lead to the opposite of that lead to connectivity, that lead to teams and individuals having that very strong sense of belonging. So I was thinking that I might share those with our listeners, if you're okay with that.
Please, go ahead.
So the 3 R's are roughly divided into the qualities of being receptive, reflective, and revitalizing. And I'll explain each of those very briefly. Receptive is what it sounds like, in the sense that you're looking for leaders to be accepting of the differences in others on their teams. But the more active form of that is actually showing curiosity. Mm. So actually trying to find out what makes this person tick, what is important to them, really getting to know who they are as human beings. And, to your point, Lois, it does create this sense of hope, in addition to this sense of belonging. And the second is reflective. And by that, we mean the leader who is able to be conscious of his or her own individual biases, because we all have them. We all have unconscious bias. If we have a brain, we have bias. But knowing what our individual biases are helps us to be more equipped to show up in a way that creates acceptance and connectivity and belonging in the workplace. And the second part of being receptive is actually the transparency behind decisions, knowing that you've made those decisions based on facts, as opposed to, say, who you are more affiliated with or connected with at work. So that's the second of the 3 R's. And the third we call revitalizing. And what we mean by that is the leader who is able to empower each team member to be the best that they can be, to succeed, and really to make an investment in each and every team member, as well as to be inspirational in the sense that they are walking the talk of inclusion and therefore inspiring others to do the same. So those are the 3 R's of inclusion, and I feel like they tie in really well with some of the analogies that you've shared.
Yeah. When you talk about reflection in particular, I think of when I was working in healthcare with some of the cancer patients. One of the things that we realized very quickly, they were in the terminal stages of cancer. And we realized very early on, we needed to be able to reflect with them on what was happening within their body. We had to be transparent and honest. We've lost something about truth telling and truth sharing, which you can't begin healing until you know the truth. And then once you've done that, then let's use our strengths to move with that, right? Where's the hope? Let's move with that. And with that, we're able to radically shift our outcomes within the cancer patients. But I think we get so professionalized, we become so hurried that we don't have that, we don't take that time. One of the things that Gary Varsho shared with me that he just really respected about Jim Leland as a baseball manager is that after a game was over, the next day they would go out and practice. And he said one of the problems you have with baseball is you're on every day, right? In season, you're on almost every day. Mm-hmm. So you go out on the field, and he would make his rounds around the field. And from your peripheral vision, you knew when your turn was coming up next. And for some, he would give them a little bit of a screw in terms of what was wrong with you last night, right? And then he'd say, but we got an important game tonight. It's a new day, a new time. Let's get going. So that would be one person. Another, it would be, what's going on at home right now? How are your kids? So he knew his people well enough to personalize what was happening. And I think that's one of the pieces that we're really missing. If we're going to look at inclusion, it's what is it that's happening in people's lives? What is it that makes me tick versus what makes you tick? And then how do we open ourselves to that? Because each of those is a strength, right? And if we use it wisely, it becomes beneficial and valuable. Another thing that he talks about that I just love as an example, because we get all caught up in doing things the right way, right? And one of the things that Gary said was when he was in AAA and looking to make it into the big league, was picked up by the Pittsburgh Pirates. And the first time he was up to bat, he was concerned. What was he going to do with his batting style? Because every time you switch your teams, you have a new coach who has a new way in which you're going to bat. And so his batting had changed many, many times. So as he's getting ready to get up to bat, he says to Jim Leland, "How would you like me to bat?" And Jim looks at him and he goes, "I don't effing care if the bat is up your ass. Get to first base and I'll take it from there." And his point was, do what's natural, do what's comfortable. Then you'll be successful and you'll get to first base. And
it's very interesting.
Is batting way up? Yeah, I'm sorry.
No. Let's edit that out and just finish your last part of that, and then I'll make a comment.
Okay, so I think what I said was I lost track.
The last piece that you were saying, but we ended up talking over each other, was that ended up increasing his batting average.
Oh, okay. So that increased his batting average and made a huge difference in his career. So simple.
Yep. I think that it's very interesting when you try to move people too far out of their comfort zone, you reduce their performance. It's not a matter of not inspiring them to do different things or to be better. But when you don't meet them where they are and allow them to do things in a way that they feel comfortable, whether that's their learning style, their communication style, or whatever else, then it's very hard for them to reach their full potential.
Denise, as you have worked with companies and tried to bring people together to create this inclusion, and I think so much of what we do creates separation, not inclusion. What is it that you think, if you were to identify one thing, is it possible to identify one thing that really makes a difference?
In terms of creating an inclusive environment, you mean?
Yes.
Of course, I'm going to say it takes all elements of the 3 R's that I mentioned to make that happen. But I think the biggest part of it is if we all walk around with the ability to step into each other's shoes and to try to see things from different perspectives and understand that the way we are seeing things, which might seem so black and white at the time, actually probably involves a substantial shades of gray. If we can possibly come to it with that mindset and then sort of combine that with this whole concept of curiosity, as opposed to feeling like we have the answers or that we're making assumptions without actually asking. I really do think at the end of the day, it's a mindset.
And mindset changes best how?
We've been struggling with this for years. It's you're asking the right questions. Behavior change does not happen overnight, and it doesn't happen with a one-off like a random workshop or training. It happens with repeated application. So what we've learned very significantly is we thought that we were really making a difference with unconscious bias training, which is basically raising the level of awareness. And it is important to raise awareness regarding your own individual bias. But we were not giving leaders any opportunity to really understand what inclusive behaviors are, how they manifest themselves in the workplace, or give them an opportunity to practice. So we have created learning that is all about that. So our live trainings and workshops, as well as our fully asynchronous e-learning, addresses that. And then, as you probably know, Lois, but maybe your listeners don't, we have gone so far as to design an inclusion virtual coach app because we realized that leaders needed the opportunity to be reminded how to use inclusive behaviors in real time. So we're actually, I like this phrase, Forbes is saying that we're using AI for good as opposed to, for manipulation, to really start making behavior change that can have a positive influence over everyone around us.
Is your app available right now?
It actually it's in beta right now, so it's being piloted for the first time among 1,000 leaders at a Fortune 5 company. So we're very, very eager to see the outcome and to make any sort of tweaks and perturbations we need to make to make sure that we're making leaders as successful as we think we will.
That is impressive. Yeah. So, Denise, if people want information, are you at a point where you're ready to put them on a list so you can share information as it becomes available?
Absolutely. Yeah. We have a clickable prototype and demos and absolutely we are creating pre-sales lists and talking to all those folks who are really serious about embedding inclusion into their organizations.
I think that's phenomenal because what people need is those practical tools at your fingertips when you're in a situation or you're going to a situation, right? What do I do? How does this look? And so having that app could be a fabulous asset to organizations. So kudos to you.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
in terms of trying to create the kind of momentum that we're looking to create with moving organizations as a whole towards being more inclusive, what are some of the strategies that you've used to create organizational transformation?
So here, for me, this is one of the things that I have become increasingly concerned with is I think what we demand sometimes of people in the workplace is amazing. I hear middle managers say to me, you know what, I gave everything to the company and they didn't care. Mm-hmm. And so the next job, I'm not going to do that, right? And it's not that they're burned out, it's that they have been let down. It's that they don't see that hope that they need in order to have the drive or to continue that drive at the level it needs to be forever. And so what we've lost is that sense of, if you want drive, there is a component of that hope that you have to build along with it, or don't expect drive to keep growing exponentially. And we do, because we want results.
Right.
So one of the things that I've become increasingly concerned about is what happens when you have that environment where people are beginning to disconnect because they see that the organization really doesn't care. So now there's some fear, there's some distrust, right? And yet we want to build teams, we want to create inclusion, we want so many things, right? And we know that it has an impact on outcomes. So I find that one of the best places to begin is with Marshall Goldsmith's feed forward process. Because you don't have to even have trust to make that work.
Okay, you have to explain that, because I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that are not familiar with that.
Okay, so we're both Marshall Goldsmith coaches. So Marshall Goldsmith teaches this methodology he calls feed forward. And he'll have a group of people and you'll go around the group and share what's one thing I can do that'll help us get to this goal or to achieve X, Y, Z. And when you're finished, no discussion, no, that's not right. That's not, whatever. It doesn't matter. You just thank them and you move to the next person. It's simply information. And so you gather these different pieces of information, and then you can take a look at prioritizing 2, 3 that you want to work on. Now, your commitment is to come back to the group and say, this is what I'm going to work on. And then each week, this is what I did while working on that. How did I do?
Right.
So you're getting feedback. Now, you're not dealing with past issues of failed performance or lack of distrust. That's a non-issue. We're moving towards a goal. How am I doing? They're moving toward the same goal. How are they doing?
Right.
So there's a more honest, I don't know, is it honest? It's more willingness to just put it out in terms of what's needed. And I don't have to like you. I don't have to trust you. I just need to say what's on my mind. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
No, I agree. Well, I mean, obviously we're both Marshall fans, or we wouldn't be Marshall Goldsmith coaches. But I love that concept. I love the fact that it's, feed forward as opposed to feedback. In other words, don't criticize me or condemn me for what I've done in the past. Tell me what I can be doing differently in the future, which I think is really critical learning. I do love also the way he and we as Marshall Goldsmith coaches are focused on improving from the point of view of how we're perceived by other stakeholders, and being able to take accountability for our actions. And as you said, not take it personally, but just constantly try to move the ball forward. So I think that's very helpful as well. I have one other question to ask you, if you're okay with somewhat non sequitur. But I am wondering in terms of your work that you've done with cancer patients, just to dive a little deeper on that. What was it that you were able to accomplish with them that led to things like, I'll let you tell the story, that led to the outcomes that were so outstanding, some of which you maybe strive to anticipate and maybe others that you didn't even know would happen?
Well, when we started the journey, we had no knowledge of what was going to happen. After all, these were all terminal patients. They were 4B plus in terms of stage of cancer. So that meant that it had already gone outside of the cancer. It was in the tissue, surrounding tissue. It was in the lymph nodes. So the mortality rate within the unit was 80% at that time. So when you come to a setting,
Lois, I'm going to hold on a second. I'm going to pause this because the internet paused. So start with the stage B that you were saying, because the internet just completely crashed.
Oh, okay.
For a second.
Okay, so the patients were, so these were women. Shall I start again? Let me just start again.
Why not? Yeah.
So the unit was gynecological cancer. They were at stage 4B plus, which means that it was already in the lymph nodes. It was outside the tumor cells. So there had already been some spread of the cancer. Our mortality rate was 80%. Mm-hmm. So the family knows the outcomes are poor. The staff knows the outcomes are poor. Everybody in the environment knows that. So what happens when you have a negative environment where things aren't going well? Same thing is true in a company that's failing or not producing results, right? There's this anomie, a tremendous sense of hopelessness that comes about everybody. And that was when I first connected with my mother's stories about how you need hope if you're going to survive. So I said, okay, you can survive a concentration camp where you've been told you're going to be a prisoner for 100 years, so get ready to get used to it, right? And you can survive that. So how do we take that to the cancer patients? And so what I realized was I couldn't solve the problem by just dealing with the patients themselves. I had to deal with the whole ecosystem. So I had to deal with the entire nursing staff, the medical staff, the administrative staff of the hospital, who are making the policies about what was going to happen within the organization. So at that unit was considered the most undesirable place in the hospital to work. You could not keep it staffed. So it took 18 months to train staff to make them fully proficient. People were leaving at 6 months. So being able to have a trained staff was very difficult. The medical staff didn't have successes to talk about at medical conferences. So they weren't very excited about this. They might as well go spend their time with people who would give them results they could present papers on at conferences. So what do you do with that? I mean, it was pretty hopeless for all of us. Mm-hmm. And so we created a whole system and hope for everybody. What does that look like? If you really want to work here as a nurse and make this fun and exciting and interesting, what would that look like? And so we started looking at what's going on in your life right now. Okay, if you're going through that, you're not going to be able to give very much to Mrs. G. So let me help you. I'll pick up these pieces today, and then when I have that situation, you'll pick it up first. So we spent time negotiating. We didn't do it every day. We had a formal time in which we did it, so people knew that they had to plan. But people knew they were going to be taken care of, right?
Yeah.
And then with the families, we created a whole program for the husbands. We created a program for the children. We had slumber parties for the children where we could talk about what's going on. Do you understand what's going on with your mom? Do you talk about what's going on? And Once we could be honest, we could then go from the fear of death to life. And it was as we shifted that focus from death to life, we created hope, right? And as we created hope, our mortality rate sank. We were about in the upper 40s, mid 40s, 40%. So it dropped from 80 to mid 40%. And in 18 months, that became the most sought after unit in the hospital to work. So the shift was dramatic, right?
So let me just to recap that a little bit. By creating change, how do I say this? By improving the lives of not just the ailing patient, but all the stakeholders around her, including her kids, her spouse, or significant others, but also including and maybe even especially her caregivers, you were able to improve the outcome for that individual. In other words, it became an entire system of improving outcomes where the quality of everybody's life improved, including the actual caregivers who then were more able to do what they were hired to do and reach their highest performance.
Absolutely. So you know how Marshall talks about saying thank you, being grateful, right? Mm-hmm. So when you have a morbid situation, you don't have much gratitude because people are very inward. They're just simply trying to survive today, this moment, this hour, right? So one of the things that we did for just for fun, but to get ready for kids' visits, was we asked people to bring in their recipes of what their kids loved. And we would bake for the children's visits, chocolate chip cookies, whatever.
I love those.
Not only did we make them for the children that were going to come, we usually did it on a Thursday. The kids came on a Friday. We then held a coffee tea party for the doctors in the afternoon as soon as the baking was done. And now the conversation was a positive conversation because it was around a gift. I made this for you. Thank you for taking care of me. It changed the dynamics of everybody. And you think, how simple, right? Mm-hmm. So Denise, I often look at that and I think, what is it that goes on in our organizations? Most of it will
I was just thinking that.
A dramatic difference. It's not huge things, but it's being intentional about what it is that's needed. And it's having your eyes open to where the problem, the sore points.
But in addition to that, just imagine if we were able to have these kinds of transparent discussions with each other in the workplace, where we actually care about what is happening in each other's individual lives on teams, where we are there for each other based on what we're experiencing at home, where we do that without embarrassment because we happen to be the one who's caring for children or caring for an ailing parent or having some other sort of personal health issue or emotional issue, but we're able to engage with each other with that kind of vulnerability, whether it be with our peers or the person that we're reporting to, because we're recognizing that we're all human and we don't have to put on this facade of we know everything, we're perfectly okay all the time, which is a standard that no one can achieve anyway. So why not create that connectivity and hope and expect that it leads to a great business outcome?
Absolutely. And so, we tend to keep things close to the chest, right? The C-suite plans, and it's tight to the chest, it goes down, and there's a certain amount of that is necessary. But people have to understand what that is in order for them to really be able to respond and to provide input. So there's a vulnerability that's involved with being transparent that you have to be comfortable with. You have to be comfortable with yourself.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to come back and say, you know what, I was wrong on that one. Let's move on.
But it is a dance. It's so interesting with regard to inclusion that inclusion requires empathy, but to the demonstration of empathy is a dance between the person who is being vulnerable and the person who then has the opportunity to express empathy. You don't get to express empathy unless vulnerability comes first, right?
Yes.
So to use your example of, the nurse in the workplace who was experiencing whatever it is she was experiencing, the other nurse was able to come and, to be there for her, to take over on the basis of that vulnerability. So,
right. The same is true on teams. I think of some of the best teams I've ever worked on. There was a willingness of the entire hierarchy to be vulnerable and to listen. So there wasn't, okay, I'm here because this is part of my hour structure of report time. Mm-hmm. It was really, this is our time. We're going to shape this together. And mm-hmm. I'm here to listen.
Very nice.
It's very different. It's a different nuance, but people get the difference.
Yep. Absolutely. Well, I think it's fascinating just to see how hand in hand individual transformation is with organizational transformation, because we don't get the kind of organizational transformation that you and I are speaking without each individual to some extent transitioning or transforming too. So to me, it's leaders that transform their behavior, that influence transforms teams or gives teams the permission to transform. And when teams transform, organizations do. So yeah. And in your example, you're talking about a life or death transformation, right? We're not just talking about increased innovation or even increased employee productivity or employee engagement that we're all looking for, or even increased revenue. We're talking about potentially saving lives. That's huge.
Yeah, it is huge.
Yeah.
And so doable. And I think of it also, we're seeing more and more, and it's something that I'm very interested in, is how do we leave a legacy, right, for the future?
I think about that.
Do you?
Oh, yes.
And how do you think about it?
Oh, it might just be that, I'll just say, do I dare say post 40?
Go ahead.
40 plus, whatever that means to you out there. That time of life where you're starting to ask yourself, what has my life meant? And have I made any sort of lasting contribution that I will be remembered for? Because at the end of the day, I'm going to be, ashes to ashes or dust to dust, and what have I left behind? And it's interesting because the work that I do and that you do, obviously, but I'll speak for myself, is so meaningful in the sense that it is improving organizations, and it is also improving the lives of individuals, in my case, particularly women and people of color. But being able to sort of see that in some tangible way is what I'm looking for. So I'm hoping that some of the work that we're doing that is in fact a little bit on the measurable side, in the sense that we can see whether we're having an impact on reducing attrition, on moving women and people of color through the talent pipeline to senior leadership. These are things that are real, that have a real impact, not just for this generation, but for the generation to come. So I'm crossing my fingers, Lois. I hope we can do it.
You know what, Denise, there are so few people who measure. And I think that is one of the things that when I first learned about what you do, that I deeply respected, was you have a sense of responsibility. We got to measure it. We got to know we make a difference. And if we don't, we're going to change it until we can make a difference. And so it's that passion that I think there's a passion to make a difference that I think is almost a prerequisite to having a legacy, isn't it?
I agree. I agree. I mean, unless you want your legacy to be, I made the most money of anyone on the block, or, something along those lines. But if you want the kind of legacy that has deep meaning, I think you're absolutely right.
I think it was Charles Garfield. I can't remember for sure if that was the author, but many, many years ago, I read that this research had been conducted looking at who we remember. And so they've gone back in history and, how many pharaohs do we really have names for that we can recount? Not many. Mm-hmm. We don't have very many emperors, unless you're from China, that you can recount, or of Russia, right? We don't, probably most of us can't recount all the presidents of the United States quickly. But we do know Mahatma Gandhi. Mm-hmm. We do know Mother Teresa. We know the people who transform people's lives.
Yeah, very true.
People who build empires come and go. People who change lives, we don't forget.
Yeah. Yep. And I can imagine that you must have a certain sense of pride and legacy in the work that you've done in the hospital, and of course, in other industries as well. But that one in particular stands out in my mind as being super meaningful.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and likewise, Denise, it is so wonderful to have this time to just share with our audiences what it is that is important, what we have found important within organizations, and the connection that we've had together as we have gotten to know one another has been just really, really wonderful. So I thank you for that.
I'm looking forward to it continuing.
Yes, likewise.
This will have to be the first of many podcasts that we do.
Wouldn't that be great? And then just to make sure everybody knows, there will be information that will be available. We'll both make that available. And just connect with us. We're glad to share with you anything that we can that will help you with what it is that you're trying to achieve in your life and in your careers.
Absolutely.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.